Chapter 1. A fair-weather boyfriend, if only she wouldn't be so darn clingy, Matthew complained, instantly receiving an enthusiastic nod of approval from Tony. That's chicks for ya, he replied in concord and with much gratitude for his support. It's always got to be all or nothing with them. The two friends, by now, were well clear of the school and had reached the end of the last suburban street that they would walk together. As Tony finished his short statement, they stopped on the corner where they always parted, each making his own way home after that. Same height, same weight, but with Matt's blonde hair and blue eyes telling of his Anglo-Saxon heritage, and Tony's dark hair and eyes hinting at Italian-American somewhere in his bloodline. Matthew White and Anthony Adams, now both 17, had known each other since kindergarten. They were inseparable, except by girls, and even then always seemed to end up finding solace in each other for some reason or other, usually girls. It's not just that she's getting too emotional lately. We were supposed to be going to the ball game tonight. Now she's canceled on me. Told you she wasn't interested. She said if I went to the theater with her, she'd go to the game with me. I thought she was looking forward to it. At least that's what she told me. So what's the excuse this time? She's too upset. Something happened on social media and she's fallen out with her BFF. Kinda makes a mockery of the last F in Best Friends Forever, don't it? But that's chicks for ya. Matt ignored Tony's remark and continued. Because someone said something anonymously about her. About Jen's BFF, I mean. Then someone said it was Jen that said it. Then that someone's BFF said it was Jen that said it. So now Jen's BFF says it was Jen that said it. The problem with women, Tony declared sagely, is they have no perspective. They take everything far too seriously, and that's why they don't know how to have fun. Not really. You're right, Matt replied, smiling with renewed confidence and appreciating, as he always did, these words of wisdom from his friend, whose mother had already suggested, on numerous occasions, that perhaps her teenage son was ready to find his own place and live life according to his own unique philosophy, while you still know everything, as she succinctly put it. Cindy Lauper was talking crap, Tony continued, as if to prove his mother's point. Girls don't want to have fun at all. They just want to have drama. Yeah, Matt said to his feet, I guess that's chicks for ya. Tony only nodded. He stood, waiting impatiently. So you'll come to the game with me, right? Thought you'd never ask. The game was a washout. Matt accepted the rain checks on behalf of both himself and Tony, to whose chagrin Matt thought he ought to offer first refusal of the rearranged fixture to Jennifer. On the next day, Thursday, it was lunchtime before Matt finally ran into her, having looked in vain for his girlfriend every free moment he had had that morning. She was sitting at a table in the lunch hall, alone, looking about as happy as a sun worshipper in a snowstorm. Matt sized her up as he walked towards her, just as he always did. Every time he saw her was as exciting as the first time he had laid eyes on her. There was nothing spectacularly beautiful about any of her features in particular. She was average height, not very tall, but not petite either. She was neither fat nor thin, just a middle-of-the-road, willowy slenderness. Her hair was not particularly long, neither was it particularly short. It was neither very dark nor very blonde, just a nondescript light brown. Her face was neither round nor oval. Her eyes were neither dazzling nor deep wells, just a medium blue-gray. Everything about her was unremarkable. Some would say mediocre, some would say medium, Matt would say perfect, as would most others of his gender. Despite there being nothing outstanding about her at all, her features were so well balanced and so ideally suited to each other that they combined to make her one of the most beautiful women that Matt had ever seen, in real life, in a magazine, on a screen, the perfect, stereotypical girl next door, with a face and a figure to die for. Hey, she replied, not sounding particularly happy to see him. Matt sat down opposite her just as her phone, which was on the table in front of her, went dark. By the time he had settled himself, it had lit up again and chimed 3 times. Jennifer glanced unhappily at it, but otherwise regarded it with an unusual lack of interest. The screen turned off for a fraction of a second before bursting into life again as alert after alert began to push each other out of the way. This time Matt lifted the phone from where she had placed it and she made no move to stop him. He turned it and watched the seemingly endless string of comments as they appeared and disappeared so quickly he was able to make out little more than the name of each author. Normally quick-fire chat like this would be a small group of close friends competing with each other for the fastest, cleverest response to the previous post, but this was clearly not a small group of close friends. In the time Matt watched the screen, 3 or 4 dozen messages were summarized on the lock screen, and he could not remember seeing the same name twice. Furthermore, some of the words his eye barely caught hold of as they flashed in and out of existence were not the kind of words he would expect a small group of close friends to use to describe each other. Matt handed Jennifer her phone back, and she laid it on the table without looking at it. "Everybody hates me," she said, making an almost superhuman effort to stop her strained whisper deteriorating into a sob, but the sob was there for Matt to hear in her words and see on her face. He froze, his ears making a strange buzzing noise. This was the last thing Jennifer needed, and the same went for him. A few vague notions floated into his head out of his psychology classes, something about negative attention, something about validation. He decided the best thing to do would be to make a valid point. "Assholes. Ignore them. I've got no friends. No one. You've got me." But Matt said this with as much enthusiasm as there was comfort showing in Jennifer's eyes. "Thanks," she whispered mechanically, in keeping with the mood of both. Matt surprised even himself with a sudden urge to leave her to it. This could not be further from the light-hearted, cool girlfriend he had signed up for. Why couldn't she forget this nonsense and just have a good time? Why couldn't she say she wanted to go to the ball game with him? Even, if we really must, the theater? He decided to have one last shot. "Still got those tickets," he offered, this time, since he was now talking about sport, much more passionately. He raised his eyebrows and waited for her response. "It's fine," she sighed, and, since Matt was no more in the habit of listening to Jennifer than to his psychology teacher, he completely missed the meaning behind her words and took them at face value. "You want me to take Tony? Why not? He'd at least be able to enjoy it." "Cool." She half smiled in response, then her face fell and she glanced down at her phone as the screen lit up again. "Listen," Matt said, feeling restless again, "I gotta go. I've got tennis practice. But I'll see you later." There was something at the back of his mind that told him he should be staying right where he was, but that thought made him feel uncomfortable, so he ignored it. What good would he be with teenage girl mind games? Leave them to get on with it. That's what they're best at. Definitely not his scene. Tennis practice was not for another hour. "Sure," Jennifer whispered, "see you later." There was one more word she almost added to the end of the sentence, but she decided to keep it to herself. There was no point in expressing her own doubts when Matt was obviously so keen to go. That would only prolong a conversation in which he was clearly a less than willing participant. Matt had no classes in common with Tony that afternoon, so he had to wait until after school to catch up with him, although they almost missed each other. He exited the main gate to find no sign of his friend, hovered in confused annoyance for a few seconds, then slapped his forehead. "Duh," he reprimanded himself and ran back through the building to one of the smaller exits on the other side. There he found Tony, standing alone, staring at him with a partly amused, partly exasperated expression liberally mixed with a good helping of "you forgot, didn't you? You made it, then." "Sorry," Matt gasped, out of breath, having broken several school rules to get there as quickly as he did. "Thought you'd decided not to bother. You know me." "Yeah. That's why I'm still here." Matt had completely forgotten that he had arranged to go to the shopping mall with Tony, to visit a sports outlet that had opened a day or two ago, with the promise of some attractive introductory bargains. While Tony was more academic, hoping to follow a career in medicine, Matt was a talented sportsman, particularly good at tennis, and who was in line for a college place with a very good chance of becoming a professional player. Because he had had a practice match that afternoon, the arrangement had been to meet at another gate, a more convenient one for the sports ground. Fortunately, Tony did not seem unduly upset. So, Matt said, once he had got his breath back, 2 tickets for the game. Going? Thought Jen was getting first refusal. She was, and she did. All is forgiven. While they walked, the conversation naturally progressed from the availability of the tickets to a brief, half-hearted inquiry after the lady in question, and then, inevitably, to a full-blown discussion of the state of Matt's love life. Told you she wasn't interested. You say that every time. 'Cause it's true. She cool? Suppose. Think I need to back off for a bit. I don't want to go on a break. Nothing like that. Not officially. Yeah. Because then someone else is sure to move in. Bound to, 'cause she's the hottest chick in the school. In the state. So what do I do? We'll hang out together for a day or 2. Let her brood for a while. Yeah, you're right. She'll get over it. Just need to wait till she starts being fun again. Stay away from women's problems, that's my motto. This is not exactly women's problems, you know. Physical, mental, what's the difference? The difference is you're never going to be voted Man of the Year by a women's magazine. Look at my face. See any tears? The conversation took them almost to their destination. All that remained was to weave through a stream of honking cars, a stream of irritated people on the pedestrianized forecourt, then the entrance doors. Around one corner, then the next, and Tony stopped abruptly, pulling back his head and shoulders as if drawing away from something in surprise. Hey, that's new. New? Not exactly a word I'd use to describe that dump. Must be a joke shop. You know, like fake poops and whoopee cushions. Could be quite cool. Cool? Fake poops and whoopee cushions cool? They might have some other stuff besides the usual crap. Matt screwed up his face, staring at the shop front in distaste. I doubt it, he said. Whatever it is, spells are us, must be some kind of trademark violation. I'm surprised they haven't got lawyers crawling all over the place. What was it used to be there? Dunno. Some kind of clothes place for chicks, I think. Matt, reluctantly, followed Tony over to the window and gazed at the sparse collection of objects on display, 1 or 2 rings, brooches, an old-fashioned goblet, and a couple of other things he could not put a name to. Makes my skin crawl, he said. That was the comment that made up Tony's mind. Before Matt could say anything, Tony, with a neat sidestep, darted past him and to the doorway, disappearing into the shop. Matt sighed and, against his better judgment, followed his friend through the door. Having looked in distaste at the exterior, Matt was not surprised to find the interior of the shop just as unattractive, too gloomy, not being particularly well lit. The place could hardly be described as cluttered. It would seem that, having looked in the window, there was very little stock that remained to be discovered, with hardly anything on display inside, just a small handful of objects whose purpose was either fictional or unimaginable, and making it difficult to decide what the shop actually sold. Certainly, no one who lived in the real world would have much use for anything here. The greatest surprise, though, to the 2 newcomers, was the sole occupant, a little old man, whose wizened appearance made both teenagers wonder that he was out on his own. To top it all, he had not even bothered to dress. Imagine coming out in public and keeping a shop in your bathrobe, Matt thought to himself. Although perhaps he figured wizards' robes might add a touch of authenticity to this pitiful display, but couldn't be bothered looking for anything that would seem more realistic. Matt, Tony, welcome, he said with an unpleasant, yellow-toothed grin. Please come in. Matt stared at him in surprise, and the expression on his face changed from distaste to alarm. How'd you know our... Hey, have you bugged your shop window so you can listen to people outside in the mall? That's spooky. That's seriously disturbing. You didn't use either of your names while you were standing outside my window. So you were listening. You have bugged. Matt stuttered to a halt as he realized the self-contradiction of what he had been about to say, and instead stared at the old man, looking confused and suspicious. You were almost right in your supposition, the shopkeeper continued. That you're spooky, Matt abruptly interrupted, causing a flicker of what looked like annoyance to flash across the old man's face, but only for the briefest of instants. Perhaps, he replied in a patronizing tone, but I meant about the shop. I suppose, in a way, you could describe it as a joke shop, but it would be more accurate to call it a magic shop, as you almost said, Tony. No, I didn't. Tony protested indignantly, mainly to deny to himself that the old man seemed to be able to read his mind, since that was exactly what he had almost said. Too weird for me, man, Matt announced. Tony nodded decisively and they both turned at the same time, beginning to make their way towards the door. However, they had only taken a few steps before being overcome by the strange feeling that leaving now would be a big mistake, and if they did, they were going to miss out on something amazing. Boys, don't go just yet, the old man said. One more thing. Not everyone is able to see this shop, and there's a reason you two can. Don't you want to stick around and find out why that is? It'll only take a few minutes. There was something compelling about his voice, something completely at odds with the repulsiveness of his appearance, something irresistibly tempting that made both Matt and Tony want to stay and listen to what he had to say. What? Matt snapped irritably, although his irksome tone was caused mainly by annoyance at himself for changing his mind so readily. Actually, it's down to you, Matt. You and Jennifer. You're the reason you and your friend managed to find me, because there's something you're not happy about, but you can't decide what to do about it. How do you know all this stuff? And what the hell has it to do with you? I like to think of myself as what you might call a wizard. Pull the other one, Tony interrupted, though sounding far from convinced. And one of the things I can do is help people understand. Understand what? Asked Matt. Understand their fellow man. Or woman. You can't just make people understand each other, Matt argued, walking over to stand in front of the shopkeeper and stare defiantly at him. That's not how it works. The old man gave him an indulgent smile, like a grandparent listening to the simplistic prattling of a toddler. I have one or two things you might be interested in, he replied, reaching below the counter to produce something that looked like a miniature weather vane. He laid it on the table, but the instant he removed his hand from it, the arrow on the top spun 180 degrees, to point in the opposite direction. This will make Jennifer fall in love with someone else, he explained, staring at Matt for a moment, before smiling very faintly. No, he said, and retrieved another strange artifact from the same place. This time it was something that looked like an impressionist sculpture, 2 figures, but it was difficult to make either out in any great detail, or determine even whether they were men or women, adults or children. They just seemed to be 2 abstract representations of people, with little to distinguish one from the other. This will make Jennifer more like you, he said, and Matt looked at him in amazement. Like me? You mean make her more like a guy? Perhaps you wouldn't like that. I'm not gay, if that's what you're trying to insinuate. And neither is Jennifer. Then perhaps that one is not for you either. The old man put his hand under the counter once more, and set a third item in front of Matt. A small, empty, cardboard box. Now, how about this? My piece de resistance, if you like. Matt laughed in surprise. I don't need an empty carton, he said. You get them free with all sorts of stuff. Firstly, it's not for sale, came the reply, only the contents. And secondly, it's not empty, you just can't see what's in it yet. Oh yeah? And how much do I have to pay caveat emptor to see what's in it? $1. Matt laughed again. But you get to see it before you decide to buy. Close your eyes. Matt complied. Now, think how you'd like you and Jennifer to be. I don't know, she's so cool, and I really like her, but things are so heavy-duty right now. The thing is, I hate seeing all this stuff happen to her, but I can't deal with that. I'm her boyfriend, not her analyst. I don't want to go on a break with her, but in that case, this is your chance to stop her giving you all these confusing signals, make her easier to understand, get a bit closer. All I want is to be able to talk to her again. I want her to like doing the same stuff as me. Oh, to be young and in love. I don't know what I would do without you kids falling in love with each other. Life would be so dull. Open your eyes. Matt heard Tony gasp softly in surprise, and moments later saw why. There was now a bright glow coming from inside the cardboard box. He leant forwards and saw what looked like a bubble sitting on the bottom, with a shimmering mother-of-pearl surface, not quite round, looking exactly like the product of a child's bubble-making wand, except for one thing: there seemed to be a light shining from inside it. Neat trick! Matt exclaimed, turning his head to search for a projector. Not a trick. What else could it be? It could be no, it doesn't matter what its real name is. The closest I can get to it in English is wish. It could be a wish. A wish? That's right, and it's yours, Matt. Matt slowly extended his hand towards the open box. $1. Oh, yeah. He fumbled in a few pockets, finally producing a crumpled roll of small denomination notes, extricated a single dollar bill, and handed that to the shopkeeper. Thank you. All yours. This time, Matt put his thumb and index finger into the box and gingerly lifted the bubble, then, turning his hand upwards, released it, allowing it to roll slowly down his fingers and come to rest in the indentation in the middle of his palm, where it sat and shimmered enchantingly. What do I use it for? Close your eyes again, fill your mind with the same thoughts you used to create the wish, and squeeze it as tightly as you can in your fist. That will make it come true. If I do that, it'll just burst, Matt argued. I'm surprised it hasn't already. Oh, no, it won't be you that breaks it, the old man said, ending the sentence strangely, as if he had been trying to avoid emphasizing the final word, but had not been able to resist the temptation. Matt's eyes flickered towards him for an instant, but then his attention returned to the tiny bubble in his hand. Careful, though, the old man warned, making Matt stop and look at him in mild concern. These things have a way of interpreting your thoughts in, shall we say, interesting ways? The results can be quite unexpected sometimes. He leant forwards and peered closely at the bubble sitting on Matt's open palm. They can be rather twisted, really. That's why I like them so much. Matt now stared at him with genuine concern. What do you mean? He stammered. Make sure you are thinking of what would be best for Jennifer, not just Matthew White. If you're only thinking of yourself, you'll become the sole focus. Matt closed his eyes, followed by his hand. Tony, who had listened in disbelief to everything that had passed between Matt and the old man, now watched in horror as his friend did the most stupid thing imaginable. Had Matt not been listening? Had only he, Tony, heard him say the wish could twist Matt's words and thoughts into something totally different? Had he not said that if Matt had been thinking of himself, then the wish would only work on him? Matt's reasons for wanting this were entirely selfish, so anything that happened was most likely to happen to Matt. Given the handful of inexplicable surprises that had greeted them since entering this weird place, allowing anything at all to happen to him was not the smartest thing Matt could do. Matt. Tony began, but his warning was too unassertive and too late. The moment Matt squeezed the glowing bubble in his fist, a bright, white light seemed to spread out from his hand, completely consumed him for about a second, then vanished just as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Tony to stare in shock at the teenage girl who now stood in Matt's place. Chapter 2. Herbal tea. Tony's shock was nothing compared to the girl's. What she felt or noticed first, he had no idea. There were so many things he could think of, probably all of them at the same time, he told himself. She looked first at the old man, who was now an inch or so taller than her, then down at herself, between her modest breasts to the hem of her skirt, and beyond, to bare legs and white trainers. Her hands opened, her fingers stretched tight, and floated away from her body as if to touch it would be fatal. They then came back towards herself, resisted the temptation to place themselves on her chest, and instead curled up into fists which she held under her chin, her arms pressed against her front, like a frightened young woman holding up a blanket to shield herself from the eyes of an unwelcome intruder. Her breathing was unsteady. She drew rapid, shallow gasps of air which she exhaled as quickly as she inhaled them. When she finally succumbed to the temptation to cross her trembling legs, she did so slowly and tentatively, finally bending in the middle slightly, almost falling forwards, at the realization there could be only one explanation for what she could no longer feel. Her breathing became even more ragged. Of course, that can sometimes happen, the old man said, but for some reason he did not sound particularly concerned. The girl's eyes, which had been staring into space in mindless horror, looking directly at him but not seeing him, now snapped back into focus. "What have you done to me?" she gasped, still breathing with as much difficulty. "What have you done?" which she repeated a few times, her voice growing quieter and more despairing with each plea. From her reaction, it was obvious the girl could be no one other than Matt, and Tony felt an uncomfortable stiffness beginning to form at the natural assumption that far more than her clothes had changed. It inevitably grew until it became almost painful, because he was unable to tear his mind away from what was missing from her body in that same place, and what she must now have instead. Coupled with the thought that it was something Matt could no longer have, Tony's embarrassing response quickly developed into a vicious circle. "What have I done?" "Nothing," the old man replied in mock innocence, then, witnessing the girl's open-mouthed outrage, smiled and added, "You made the wish. You did this yourself." I didn't wish for this. We can all see it's come as a shock, but perhaps this is what you truly wanted." "What? That's not true. How can you even say that?" "Although I think it might be more accurate to say, perhaps this is what you truly said you wanted. It can be difficult to tell with these wishes, sometimes. They're a law unto themselves." Matt stared back at him, looking devastated, hurt, lost for words. She was no longer standing with her legs crossed, having now placed both feet side by side, and her hands were not clasped under her chin anymore, instead holding her shoulders, with her arms covering the most easily visible of her primary sex characteristics. Tony had no more recovered from the shock than Matt, and had not yet regained the ability to do anything other than stare at her in amazement. She was thin, the way a girl of Matt's age should be, but still with a well-developed, athletic figure, devoid of the bumps and curves usually brought on by overindulgence. She was very, very beautiful, and that was what brought him back to reality. Shock slowly gave way to appreciation, and he realized with a start that he was becoming sexually attracted to his friend, Matt. He fought down his feelings, but then the girl spoke and he was back to square one again. "Please," she said quietly, in a sweet, pleading voice that made Tony's heart go out to a damsel in distress, "please don't do this to me. Please help me." But the old man only shook his head, making Tony's blood boil. "You heard her," he said in a raised voice, intended to be authoritative, but coming over as childishly insolent. "She told you to change her back, so do it. Now." "That's enough," was the old man's response. He pointed one index finger at Tony, who immediately felt a strange sense of relaxed openness in his throat, as if an obstruction had suddenly been cleared. The first thing he noticed was when he took his next breath, how much easier it had become to pull air into his lungs. The second was when he tried to use that breath to argue. He was unable to make a sound, not even an angry grunt. "You can have your larynx back once you've learned some manners," the old man said, and returned his attention to Matt, who was too distraught to have noticed. "Only you can reverse the wish," he said, making the girl's eyes open wide with sudden hope, "because it was you who made it." "How?" She sounded enthusiastic and almost happy. "Simple. Make another." The old man and the girl leant forward at the same time to look into the empty cardboard box, still sitting on the counter. She put out her hand to take it, but he was quicker, and snatched it first. "Ah," he warned her, "remember it's not for sale. It's a service only." Matt's face fell. "And how much is the second wish?" she asked. $50 million? "Not quite. $1, same as the first." Matt now noticed a small bag at her feet. She grabbed it and began to rummage in it, looking for money. "Not so fast," the shopkeeper interrupted. Matt stopped and looked up at him, worried. "What?" "You need to give it time to recover first." "What? How long?" "It's not easy to tell. That depends on how much effort went into the last one. And," he added appreciatively, "I'd say making you took a lot of work." That comment earned him a look of disbelief mixed with indignation. Think of it like those phones and spots you kids use, he explained. It takes time to recharge. How long? She persisted with her question, sounding more and more exasperated. Don't know, I'm afraid. Like I said, these wishes are a law unto themselves. Could be days, more likely weeks. What? Weeks? No. No way. Change me back now. Matt had finally snapped out of her haze of confusion and was becoming frightened and angry, as it became clear that what had initially seemed a repugnant joke might stretch into a repugnant week, a repugnant fortnight, a repugnant month. There's nothing any of us can do about it. All we can do is wait. Matt finally snapped. She launched into a tirade, sprinkled occasionally with words that she would never have used, even as a boy trying to show off to his friends. That's enough, came the stern response, but this time, instead of a finger pointing at Matt's throat, the box was laid down on the counter, out of her reach, and a clenched fist held over it like a hammer, threatening to crush it with a single blow. She immediately fell silent, her eyes pleading for mercy, but unable to drag themselves away from the little cardboard box that represented her salvation. The old man waited a few seconds until she had calmed down before he resumed. I have a rule that I never tolerate abusive language from anyone. Especially girls. I'm not a girl. You are Michelina White, 17, female, Branwell East High Senior. You're lying. I'm Matthew White. I'm a 17-year-old boy. The old man waited just long enough for what she had said to sink in, then he twisted the knife. Prove it, he taunted, with a cruel evenness to his voice, and then watched in satisfaction as tears began to collect in her eyes. Please, she begged, please. Sorry, was the only answer. The same finger pointed at Tony's throat, making him gasp in shock. You bastard! Tony exclaimed, why did you do that to me? Don't you ever do anything like that again. It's time both of you left. No. I'm not going until you've changed me back into a guy again. Matt stared at the old man, Tony stepped up beside her and they both looked at him as angrily as they could, but it was mildly comical, because their stern expressions were mingled with fear. The smile that met their display of would-be assertive body language changed from amusement into something a little more grim before he replied. I think I ought to explain something you should have realized for yourselves by now. One of you has been turned into a girl. One of you had his voice taken away as easily as snapping my fingers. I suggest you leave, now, while you're both still human. Matt's mouth moved faintly as if she were trying to plead for clemency, but was sinking deeper into the realization there was no point. She looked round at Tony in despair and he decided to make one last attempt to rescue her. Please, he now said on her behalf, I'm begging you. What about Matt? If you send us away now, what's he going to do? Matt looked round hopefully at the old man, her eyes beseeching him to relent. Her name's Michelina, he said, her friends call her Mickey, as do you, although sometimes your pet name for her is Mick. That should save you the embarrassment of having to be told your friend's name by someone else. No need to thank me. Thank you, the girl spluttered in disbelief, thank you, but, unable to decide which of a million insults should introduce the question of exactly what there was for her to thank him for, she hesitated too long. You're welcome, was the smart reply, making her squeal in frustration through clenched teeth. And now, I must insist. He continued, then he raised his hand again, with his finger pointing not at the door, but at the two teenagers. His whole figure seemed to darken, like a threatening shadow, and Matt and Tony immediately scuttled to the exit and out into the mall, where they turned as one and scowled thunderously at the door as it swung shut. What do we do now? Tony said, white-faced, as he and Matt turned to stare, wide-eyed, at each other. Both looked frightened out of their wits, but there was also a strain of outraged injustice on the girl's face. We need to find some way to make him. She began, turning to stab her finger at the shop and its sole occupant, but instead broke off with a gasp of shock. She was venting her frustration on a ladies' boutique, one that specialized in teenage fashion, exactly the type of place where seniors go to buy their prom dresses. That was the shop that had originally been in that spot, the one the two boys had been trying to remember, but that was not the point. Spellsarus had completely vanished. There was no sign of the old man who had changed Matthew into Michelina. There was no old man to change her back into Matthew again. She dropped her arm and stared at her friend in despair. "It's gone," she whimpered, making Tony raise his eyebrows an almost unnoticeable fraction at her unintentional double entendre. "What are we going to do?" she sobbed, then, seeing the blank expression on Tony's face, "I can't go home like this. What am I going to do? We need to find somewhere to talk, and to think. I'll get the drinks." "You find a table," Tony said, and was rewarded by a look of gratitude, the first pleasant expression he had seen on Matt's face since she had ceased to be a boy. "Thank you," she said, something to hide behind, at least. She slipped off to an empty table she had spotted in the far corner, pulling the hem of her skirt as she walked away, painfully embarrassed that the backs of her legs were visible to the people behind her, who could be looking anywhere, without her knowledge. Sliding onto the seat, paranoid about the shortness of her skirt and the possibility that someone might be able to see inside it, she continued to play with the hem until Tony approached carrying a tray, making a poor show of pretending he was carefully watching what he was holding and not, as he really was, looking past it in appreciation of two long, golden limbs with a small piece of fabric across their owner's lap. "This is terrible," she whispered immediately, as he took his seat across from her, thankfully helping to block line of sight. "My boxers are bigger than this thing. It's like coming out in public in your underwear. How can girls wear them? I think you step into them, same as with pants. You're not helping." "Sorry, Matt," Tony apologized, sliding a cup across the table, small herbal tea. "That's not what why herbal tea? That's what girls usually have, isn't it?" "How would I know?" "Well, that's the sort of thing my girlfriends have usually asked for." "What does Jennifer drink?" Matt stared across the table, looking displeased. "Herbal tea," she admitted. "There you are, then," Tony said gleefully, then, seeing the look on his friend's face, added, "What? Jennifer. What about her? I guess we really are on a break now. I dunno. Might be worth a shot," Tony said, so dreamily and with such a far-off look in his eyes that Matt kicked him under the table. "I thought you were supposed to be my friend," she whispered, but so vehemently that one or two heads turned and immediately glanced away. "Why can't you say something that makes me feel better?" "Yeah, look, I'm sorry," Tony said. He met the girl's eyes and they considered each other for a few moments, he looking concerned, she looking frightened. She looked like a feminine version of her old self, he thought, the same blue eyes, but with a subtle enhancement in shape, and slightly more of a sparkle, the same blonde hair, except now it brushed her shoulders, the same nose, although suitably smaller, a perfected version of her original mouth. The seriousness of the situation began to sink in, and Tony found himself thinking and speaking much more calmly, which had a similar, soothing effect on Matt. "I want you to know I'm here for you. I'll do anything I can to help you get through this." Matt sighed, looking as if she could burst into tears. "I don't want to get through this. I want to get back as I was. I don't want to be a girl 1 second longer than then. I don't even know how long it's going to be. We'll just have to keep coming back until that wish thing starts working again." "Yeah." Matt sounded happier at that thought, and she almost smiled. "Listen, one other thing, Em. I mean, Em." "What?" "I think I should stop calling you Matt. For now." "But that's my name." "Yeah, but everybody else'll think it's weird." "Weird? So what's it to be then? Esmeralda the Fairy Queen? The old man said your name was Michelina, or Mickey, so I think we should use that." "Must you?" "Well, no, not always, because I sometimes call you Mick apparently." "Mick?" "Tony, that doesn't make any sense. You think that because it's weird to call me by a boy's name, you should call me by a boy's name?" Tony opened his mouth to argue but was cut off by another voice from a few yards away. "Hey! You guys! Matt looked round at the same time as Tony, and her heart sank when she saw two other kids from their year, Karen McNamara and her boyfriend Tom Price. Karen waved enthusiastically and Matt half-heartedly raised her hand. When Tom said something to her, Karen turned away to tell him what she wanted, and Matt immediately leant forwards and hissed urgently, "Tony, get me out of this somehow. What if she recognizes me? She won't, I'm sure. But what if she realizes I'm Matt White? It'll be all over the school in time. Matt White's a crossdresser. He was in the mall, dressed as a girl. But you are a girl. Tony, please. Just play it cool and you'll be fine. Michalina." She glared back at him in exasperation, mainly due to the fact she knew he was right. She would have to accept Michalina, or Mickey, at least for the foreseeable future. Michalina. Mickey. Mick. She sighed in despair. "Mickey," Karen interrupted, reaching the table and putting an end to any protest. "So, tell me, what have you two been up to?" "Up to? What do you mean? Don't try to hide it, little Miss Innocent." Tom arrived and took the fourth seat, punching Tony playfully on the shoulder and grinning knowingly at him as he slid Karen's drink towards her. Mickey realized with a start that both Karen and Tom thought she and Tony were together. She became so completely flustered she had no idea how to reply. A whole cavalcade of thoughts flashed through her mind in quick succession as she realized that Karen had called her Mickey. That meant Karen clearly thought she was a girl, so everyone else probably did too, possibly everyone except, obviously, herself and Tony. However, the thing she could not get past was that Karen seemed to think she was Tony's girlfriend. How many other people thought the same thing? She was unable to decide what was worse, everyone thinking she was a girl, or everyone thinking she had a boyfriend. Tony was no help. He was equally dumbstruck. Fortunately, Karen then decided to change the subject. Unfortunately, she had just finished dragging Tom around the shops and, having got little or no feedback from a male, jumped at the opportunity to discuss every single item of clothing she had just bought with a fellow woman. Mickey immediately found herself baffled by a seemingly endless trail of different shapes, colors and textures, most of which she had never thought of before, and some of which she had never heard of before. She was quickly reduced to nodding and smiling passively, with the occasional, "cool," or "wicked," or "you'll look lovely in that," thrown in as a blind to her ignorance and bamboozlement. Their drinks were nearly finished and the conversation on the point of winding up when Karen took it in a completely different direction. "I'm glad I ran into you, Mickey," she said, lowering her voice. "I'm worried about Jennifer Moffat." "Why? What's wrong?" "She's been pretty down. Haven't you noticed? She's been like this for days now." "Well, I know she's not been quite herself recently, but..." Mickey's voice trailed off, leaving her thinking, she's not the only one, and when she glanced over at Tony, saw in his eyes that he was thinking the same thing. She shrugged in resignation, a gesture that Karen, to her concern, mistook for apathy. "You haven't fallen out with her too, have you?" No, of course we haven't. It's just, things between us aren't quite what they were." Mickey stuttered, completely taken aback, and completely unsure what her new relationship was with Jennifer, making her completely at a loss how she should respond. "I know you and Jen don't hang out much now, cross your heads in tennis these days, but you used to be close, so I guess you ought to know. She's been having a real tough time on social media. Cyberbullying, and it's pretty serious. I don't think she really wants to talk to me because I'm friends with Angela, but I thought that because you don't have many. I mean," Karen reddened, "because you're not friends with any of the people giving her a hard time, she might listen to you. So what would an actual girl do in a situation like this?" Mickey thought to herself, then replied, "Thanks, Karen. I'll give her a call soon as I can, see if I can help." "You do that, girl, 'cause I think she needs someone." Karen and Tom left. Mickey and Tony stared at each other. "At least you still play tennis." "I'm your girlfriend?" Michalina threw herself onto her bed, lay on her back and closed her eyes. Her pilgrimage from coffee shop to bedroom had been an adventure full of trial and tribulation. Once out of the cafe and on their way home, they had begun to walk a little faster, which had made her more aware of her body than ever before. Joints, muscles, shapes, positions, everything felt and worked differently. Her arms did not want to stay at her sides the way they used to, and her feet insisted on placing themselves one in front of the other instead of either side of the line she was walking. Even her skeleton seemed to be greatly changed. She was sure every male who passed was staring at her legs, her chest, her backside, making her feel as if 100 laser sights were being trained on her. She tried to tell herself it was natural, they couldn't help it, she would have been doing exactly the same an hour or two ago, but still she was unable to shake off the feeling of invasion and unwelcome scrutiny. She made up her mind that, once she was Matthew again, she would do her best to honor the perennial insistence of women. Hey, I'm up here, you know. Then there was the arrival home. Once upon a time, she would have exchanged greetings with her mother in passing, with very little information being dragged out of her before she escaped to her own domain, but this time she was not allowed to pass until every last little detail had been extracted. Hi, sweetheart, did you have a good day? Yeah, Mom, thanks. Hey, not so fast, young lady. Tell me about it. Well, you know. I went to school, then the mall, then came home. What's got into you? Usually I can't get you to shut up. Where do you want me to start? Who'd you see at school? How was tennis practice? Did you go to the mall with Tony? Did he walk you home, I hope? That cost Mickey another half hour before she was finally able to extricate herself and make her way upstairs to her room, feeling emotionally exhausted. However, there was another surprise waiting for her. Gone were the posters of male sports stars, to be replaced by a combination of sportswomen and boy bands, most of whom Matt had detested. Gone was the masculine decor, to be replaced by yellow and a light, girlish approximation of blue. Gone were Matt's clothes, replaced by skirts, blouses, dresses, with even the jeans having a feminine look to them. Her underwear drawer was the stuff of nightmares. Everything was too flimsy, or too lacy, or was ridden with complicated straps. Lying with her eyes closed, she was unable to get over how many things had changed in the blink of an eye that afternoon. Even lying on her back, perfectly stationary, felt completely different. The way her mother had spoken to her, too, as a boy, she had called her sweetheart occasionally, but there was something that had subtly altered about the way she had said it this time, just as there had been something in her voice when she mentioned Tony, as if she had been torn between liking him and feeling a mother's natural protective instincts for her daughter where boys are concerned, which usually manifests itself as a measured disapproval of boys in general, and well-known ones in particular. Sighing, she picked up her phone, hoping that a call to Jennifer would seem a little more like normal. The other end rang 5 times before a faint, "Hi." Mickey answered, with the distressing tone of someone who was clearly far from happy. The voice on the other end sounded like a perfect match for Mickey's own mood, although it still had exactly the same effect it always had, at least to begin with. As Matt, whenever she had seen her, held her hand, kissed her, or even just talked on the phone as she was doing now, she always had the same reaction. Firstly, a pleasant knot of something warm forming inside her, then growing and stiffening like an iron rod strengthening her core, pride that this woman was her girlfriend, then finally the typical masculine reaction, warm, seductive, and dazzlingly pleasant. Now, for the first time, Mickey was experiencing a despairingly truncated version of that response, the pleasant warm knot, the steely resolve at her core, pride at Jennifer's and her mutual affection, but that was where the sequence came to an end, because there was no masculine reaction, no warm, seductive and dazzlingly pleasant response to the image of Jennifer's beauty in her mind, just nothing at all. No feeling of masculinity, no feeling of stiffness and potency, no feeling of readiness, no movement, no stirring, just nothing. Her voice cracked as she tried to say, "Hey, Jen, you all right?" and it was completely obvious to the girl on the other end how upset she was. "Oh, my God. Mickey," she said, "what is it? Tell me what's wrong." "Jen. Mickey sobbed, utterly at a loss what to say. She could hardly answer honestly. "I'm crying because I've just been turned into a girl," so, her mind racing, she came up with a plausible excuse, the truth. I I ran into Karen McNamara in the mall, she said, and she told me about. Jen, it's horrible what's been happening to you. Absolutely terrible. I just try to ignore it, but it's so difficult, you know? I can't stop looking at my phone. Do you want me to come round? Mickey suggested, gritting her teeth and screwing up her face at having suggested something that really was not a very good idea for herself. Well, we could put our phones off and just talk, Mickey persisted, all the time inwardly hoping that Jennifer would say it's all right, that she would say no, because the last thing she wanted to subject herself to was the ordeal of being in Jennifer's company, but not being a boy. However, the reality turned out to be far, far worse. That would be great, Mickey. I'd like that. Cool. I'll be right over, Mickey replied, her heart sinking, but a few moments later it plummeted into hell. Mickey? Yeah? Why don't you stay tonight? You can sleep with me. Chapter 3. The No Good Samaritan. I really don't approve of sleepovers on a school night, Mrs. White insisted. Why can't the two of you wait till the weekend? I wouldn't have a problem with that, and it's only one more night. I wouldn't ask, but it's just that Jen is so upset. And she needs you? I know how you teenage girls blow everything out of proportion, and the world's coming to an end because someone said something unkind about your hair, or, perish the thought, your shoes, but I don't think that means rushing into each other's arms at the drop of a hat, or staying up late midweek, as I'm sure will happen if you go round there. It's not like that. She's genuinely upset. Almost everyone's turned on her, and I think I'm the only friend she has left. I'm worried about her. Turned on her? What do you mean? Comments on Instagram, Snapchat. Oh, here we go. Social media strikes again. For 2 pins I'd collect every one of your phones and throw them all in the sea. She really isn't in a good place right now. Please. I'll phone Jennifer's mother. Thanks, Mom. Hold your horses, young lady. I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes either. Wait till I've had a chance to speak to Eva, then we'll decide. Mickey flopped down on the sofa and stared at the new shape of her legs while waiting for the verdict, in 2 minds. Firstly, she could feel a natural reluctance for spending time with Jennifer while in this body, but, secondly and perhaps more importantly, she was suddenly concerned about the person she still thought of as her girlfriend, and was hoping would be so again in the not-too-distant future. Her mother had gone into the kitchen to make the call, so she was not able to make out much more than the general tone of her muffled voice, but even so she could tell that initial resistance had given way to a quieter, more understanding concern. When her mother came back into the room, she twisted round to look at her in anticipation. I'll help you throw a few things in your bag, if you like, Mrs. White said, making her daughter gasp in a mixture of delight and trepidation, then I'll take you over. Mickey jumped up and gave her a hug. Thanks, she squealed, surprising herself with her own reaction, and ran upstairs. Remember your things for tomorrow, her mother called after her, following at a much more sedate pace. Then you can go straight to school from Jennifer's. Although Matt had often been in Jennifer's house, he had never before been in her bedroom. He had tried to imagine what it was like, how it was done up, whether she had a picture of him, and he had often thought how wonderful it would be if he ever won the right to enter the forbidden inner sanctum, but for Mickey it was a hollow victory, although she was being led into what to a teenage boy would have seemed the resting place of the Holy Grail. To a teenage girl it was a mundane setting, where she was welcome at any time, because as a girl she was completely harmless. There was a picture, though, which made her heart leap, although it was a picture of her and Jennifer as girls, aged 10 or 12, perhaps, holding their skateboards, proudly posing, comically serious, partly obscured by helmets and pads on their elbows and knees. Mickey was touched that Jennifer was fond enough of her to treasure a memory from so long ago, and it strengthened the bond she herself felt and gave her a slight pang of guilt that a more recent image of the two was not on display, however that only made her all the more determined to make her friend feel better, and to earn the right to that absent photo. Just dump your bag in the corner for now, Jennifer said. By the way, you can sleep with me if you want, or on the floor. Or I could sleep there and you could have the bed, if you'd prefer. Together's fine, Mickey replied, unable to believe her luck for two contrasting reasons. Firstly, she was finally going to sleep with Jennifer, but, secondly, earlier that day she had been made incapable of claiming the spoils of victory. Jennifer sat on the edge of the bed and gave her a weak smile, a very weak smile. "Thanks for coming over," she said, her voice unsteady, and with an edge that perfectly matched the unusual set of her face as she looked uncertainly at Mickey, who now sat down beside her, close enough for the outside of their thighs to press together near the knee. "Hey, don't mention it," she replied, bending over to look at Jennifer's downturned face, and putting her hand on her shoulder, just behind her neck. "Thought you could do with a friend." To her discomfort, Jennifer's reaction was to disintegrate into sobbing, her face twisted up. Her body began to quiver and her breathing became ragged. She sank towards Mickey, who slid both arms around her and pulled her close. Jennifer's head dropped onto her shoulder and she held her, completely supporting her weight as Jennifer poured out every emotion that had been penned up inside her for days on end. There was nothing that could be done but wait for the tide to turn. Gradually Jennifer's tears subsided and eventually she had calmed enough for Mickey to try to speak to her. "Any better?" she opened. "Feel ready to talk?" That simple question started her off all over again, and Mickey returned to holding her. This time she shuffled closer, putting her arm fully around her friend's shoulders, and sitting side by side, with their heads resting against each other, like a young couple in the back row of the cinema. This was something they had often done before, although only one of them now remembered it. Presently, Jennifer took a few deep breaths. "I've fallen out with Angela," she croaked, "big time. She says she hates me." "What happened?" Anna Jackson posted that someone had made a really nasty comment, saying her new outfit made her look like a chimpanzee, and everybody started laughing at her. "I know it sounds stupid, but Angela got really, really upset about it and demanded to know who it was." Anna wouldn't tell. "I think it was her. I tried to stick up for Angela and tell people to leave her alone, but then someone said she thought I was the one who started it, then someone else said it too, and then everyone turned on me instead. Angela too." At this point, Jennifer broke down for a short while before she was able to continue. Angela started to believe it because so many people were saying the same thing. "Give her some time. She'll come around. She made it clear she doesn't want anything to do with me, ever again. That's a very long time, and I'm sure it's not true either. She'll realize how unfair this is." Jennifer shrugged sadly, but did not argue. Mickey lifted Jennifer's phone from the bedside cabinet and gave it to her. Jennifer held it in her hand for a while, uncertain what to do, almost laying it back down again and saying she would rather talk about something else. Mickey waited patiently, saying nothing, and finally Jennifer unlocked the phone and handed it over. Mickey opened a few apps and scrolled through page after page of messages while Jennifer watched despondently, horrified at some of the things her friend was seeing. Although none of them were true, they still made very unpleasant reading, and Mickey fully understood why her friend was reluctant to let her look at them. Anyone who did not know Jennifer well would be so shocked by what they read that they may well start to wonder if perhaps some of the insults were not justified after all, so strong and forceful were they. Mickey eventually put the phone down on the bed, face down, and looked steadily at Jennifer before she spoke. "Let me tell you something else," she said gently. "Those comments say more about the people who made them than they do about you. Way more. You remember that." The corners of Jennifer's mouth twitched and turned up very slightly, a lovely sight, after her face had looked so despondent for so long, and that made Mickey all the more determined. A few important points floated into her head out of her psychology classes: the seductive nature of negative attention, the importance of validation. She decided the best thing to do would be to validate Jennifer's feelings. Reading some of those horrible things people have been saying, she began, "You're right to feel the way you do. Anyone would feel the same. So do I. I feel hurt and abused that people could say such terrible things about my friend, but for you it must be unbearable. I said already that these spiteful comments say more about them than about you, and I meant it. I know it's difficult, but you should try to keep your distance from all this. A lot of those people will realize how nasty they're being and will regret it. They'll even apologize. You wait." "But when?" And until then, you've got me. Unlike her reaction in the lunch hall earlier that day, Jennifer smiled, and unlike her reaction in the lunch hall earlier that day, Mickey felt a warm surge of emotion right in her middle. She smiled too. The ones who don't come around. Jen, all that means is that, unfortunately, they're not the nice people you thought they were, but that's their problem, not yours. Jennifer nodded, looking slightly less tense. I've got you, and that's all I need right now, she said, sounding much less tense. Why don't we do what I said before? Put our phones off and just talk. Yeah. And leave them off till we go to sleep. I'll text Mom and tell her. Her thumbs danced on the screen for a few seconds and a reply, "Okay SW," followed by an emoji of a heart, came back almost immediately. Mickey transferred her thumb to the power button, laid her phone down on the bedside cabinet, and seconds later, Jennifer's joined it. They turned simultaneously to face each other, cross-legged on the bed. Jennifer smiled uncertainly. "I want to tell you something," she said. "I'm all ears." "Believe me, I want to know everything," Mickey replied, suddenly enthusiastic about the possibility of discovering a few secrets about Jennifer, secrets that may be useful later, to Matt. "Rob Smith asked me to be his date for the prom." It was a bit of a struggle for Mickey to stop her face falling at that moment, and to keep her smile in place. Here she was, sitting on a bed facing her ex-girlfriend, unwelcome movements on her chest, an unwelcome flatness stretched even more flat by her cross-legged position, about to discuss the guy who was taking her place. "And did you say yes?" Jennifer's face now fell, giving Mickey an excuse to do the same, and gaining some temporary relief from the pretense of being happy. Jennifer nodded, but still looked downcast. "Yes," she replied, "I did, but that was before all this happened. I haven't spoken to him since." "Mickey, what if he's avoiding me? What if he doesn't want to go with me anymore? None of the girls are talking to me, now the boys too?" "Sorry. You're talking to me, and you're a girl." Mickey desperately needed to say something to take her mind off that last statement of Jennifer's, so she blurted out the first thing that came into her head, almost steering herself towards disaster. "Rob Smith? You could do a lot better than him." "Oh, yeah? Like who?" She leant a little closer and lowered her voice, smiling wickedly. "Someone else you think's hot? Tell me. How about Matt White?" Mickey immediately cringed at the stupidity of her suggestion. "Matt White? Hey, have you a cousin you haven't told me about?" "Jen, sorry, I was thinking of something completely different." "Forget I said that. Rob's cool." At that very moment, Mickey absolutely hated Rob Smith, for a multitude of reasons, none of which were Rob's fault, and all of which were either the fault of that damnable old man, or, to be perfectly honest, Mickey herself, and that last thought stung almost as much as the realization that she knew exactly what Jennifer was talking about. She seemed to have gained the ability to agree with her friend that Rob was indeed very attractive. In fact, on several occasions, Matt had looked at himself in the mirror and told himself he was just as good-looking as Rob Smith, wishful thinking though it may have been at the time. Now, not only was she light years further away from being able to challenge him in the masculine good looks department, but thinking of him was having a completely different effect on her, an effect that scared her half to death. "You think so? I'm so glad you like him. I just hope he keeps his word. You're all right. You've got Tony, but if Rob ditches me, I don't know what I'll do." This was amazing. Jennifer had never opened up to her like this before, and been willing to expose her vulnerabilities, and her thoughts and hopes for the future. As the conversation progressed, both Jennifer and, to Mickey's surprise, she herself revealed more and more of their inner selves, and then something else struck her. Jennifer's aspirations were centered on people and friendships, rather than objects and possessions. By the time they were getting ready for bed, Mickey and Jennifer were much closer than they had ever been. As boys, she and Tony had never shared such intellectually or emotionally intimate moments as she and Jennifer had, and all this within an hour or two. The two girls both began to undress, and that, for Mickey, brought her straight back down to earth again. As she unbuttoned her blouse, she glanced at Jennifer, who was, by then, wearing only her briefs, giving Mickey her first ever look at the wonderful Jennifer Moffat topless, and she was absolutely lovely, soft, slender, perfectly shaped. She was unable to resist looking down at herself to see, to her regret, a figure that was every bit as lovely. When Jennifer began to pull on a t-shirt nightdress, Mickey had another excuse to watch, and to look at her chest. The logo read, "No mole star poor favor." "Like it?" Jennifer laughed. "I got it last summer, when we were in Spain. I thought it was funny. It means, 'Do not disturb please,' but to me it suggests, 'No molesters please.'" She giggled again and left in the direction of the bathroom, leaving Mickey to think to herself, "Couldn't if I wanted to." She found it quite a fiddly task, unhooking the straps of her bra, and once open, began to wonder if she would ever be able to fasten it again, but that thought vanished, immediately pushed out by the unexpected, alien sensation of peeling the cups from her breasts, then by the shock of staring down to see them for the first time. There was a full-length mirror on the opposite wall, and she gazed wide-eyed at it, unable to believe that the person reflected by it was herself. She raised her hands to her chest and her breathing again became ragged, a feeling of panic steadily rising, but by forcing herself to take slow, deep breaths, managed to calm down, and then moved on to the next assault on her lost masculinity. Earlier, at home, when she had changed into jeans, thankfully freeing herself from the feeling of relentless exposure caused by her short skirt, she had done her best to ignore the small mound that gave the front of her briefs their unmistakable shape, and had hidden it from her own view as quickly as possible. Now, as she sat on the edge of the bed, pulling denim over her feet, the opposite was true. She was unable to take her eyes off that part of herself. She dropped her jeans on the floor and placed her fingers there, gasping, then whimpering, at the dual sensation of body against hand and hand against body. Involuntarily, she moved very slightly down, her middle finger sensing the beginning of a groove through her underwear, and making her snap her hand away as if burnt. She grabbed her own nightdress and threw it over her head, not caring about the effect such rapid arm movements had on her chest, then spotted herself in the mirror, slim legs and small feet below the knee-length hem, a hint of immature curves not quite obscured by her clothing, one small bump visible on her chest, the other covered by her arm, her hand over her mouth, looking like a frightened woman. She did not attempt to rebel against that impression by removing her hand from such a feminine pose, because that was exactly what she was, a frightened woman. Mickey was only brought out of her reverie by the sound of Jennifer returning. Opening the door, she immediately halted and looked at her friend in concern. "What is it?" she said. "Mickey? What's wrong?" "It's all right," Mickey lied in response. "I was just thinking about those messages on your phone." "Sorry, Jen, I know we agreed not to." "Don't worry about it," Jennifer replied. She looked slightly melancholy, but she was also smiling faintly. "I know how difficult it is, believe me. Anyway, I need to." Mickey stammered, looking for an excuse to change the subject. Hurry up then. This is a new carpet." The two girls stared at each other for a second or two before both burst out laughing simultaneously. They hugged briefly as Mickey left the room, but she had completely deflated by the time she had crossed the threshold of the bathroom, because there, in the opposite corner, lurked an evil monster. It was white and smooth, had a seat and a lid, and it was waiting to capture and torture her. Since she had become Mickey, she had had only a few sips of tea in the coffee shop, a few mouthfuls of water over a hurried dinner, and as a result had not needed to go to the bathroom until now. However, at this point she had no option but to face a horrifying truth. There was something she was about to see for the first time, was possibly about to touch for the first time, and she was going to have to do something quintessentially feminine for the first time. Her eyes were prickling as she turned and locked the bathroom door. Lying in bed, it was not easy for Mickey to find a comfortable position. On her back, her breasts spread out over her chest and under her arms, and the weight of the covers only emphasized that feeling. On her side, her breasts and arms touched, which was little better, and, with one leg almost straight and the other in front, resting her knee on the mattress, she was pressing her thighs together, which was much worse. She was about to return to her back when she heard a rustle of the covers, sensed Jennifer's body heat, felt knees, feet, softness, then a hand against her, and finally her face settling into her hair. Mickey's eyes stretched wide open, wondering what was about to happen. Jennifer murmured sleepily, "Thanks for coming over. It's wonderful to have such a good friend as you." "Night-night, Mickey. Love you." "Love you too," Mickey whispered in relief, thankful she was not expected to do something that would make her miss her male body even more than she did at that present moment. Her former girlfriend snuggling up against her in bed was enough of an ordeal, under the circumstances. Almost immediately, Mickey could tell that Jennifer had dropped off to sleep, which effectively trapped her in the position she was lying in, not wanting to wake her friend. She slid her arms slightly away from herself so that she could not feel her breasts against them. There was still the slight sensation of them pulling downwards, to the side as she lay, but she expected to be able to mask that out. Her upper leg she managed to position on top of the other, slightly behind, with the result it no longer felt so different from last night, as if the only reason she could not feel what was missing was simply because nothing was touching it. All she needed now was to fall asleep, and very shortly she sank into blissful forgetfulness. Waking up the next morning was a frightening, upsetting experience. She came to on her back, immediately conscious of something strange lying across her chest, pressing, gently but steadily, onto her. She turned her head at the sound of a voice saying, "Morning," to find Jennifer Moffat lying at her side. All thoughts of those strange sensations evaporated as she realized to her delight that she had slept with Jennifer last night, and she immediately began to search her memory for the wonderful experience of making love to this beautiful girl. Then her legs crossed as she turned around to face her companion, her arm brushed against her chest. Her deep, rich, seductive "hi" was spoken by a female voice, and all the injustice, frustration, and weight of the world bore down on her. "I'm glad you're here," Jennifer gushed. "I feel so much better." She put her arms around Mickey and pulled her into a hug. "Glad you feel better," came the response, muffled by a mixture of pillow, hair, and embrace. Mickey had tried not to emphasize the "you" to avoid changing the meaning of her words, and had almost succeeded, but the emphasis had been there, although it had gone unnoticed. Like the old man in the shop, she had been unable to resist, and his words, "It won't be you that breaks it," came back to her with an unpleasant thump. Breaking point might not be very far off. "I know you're the guest, but..." Jennifer smiled as she let go of Mickey and backed away. "I'm gonna beat you to the shower." She giggled, already rolling out of bed, and she had flown through the bedroom door before Mickey had a chance to do what Jennifer only imagined she would, to try to beat her to the bathroom. Mickey, on the other hand, had absolutely no desire to join in the race, as the longer she could put off the need to remove her clothes and get into the shower, the better. Not that staying in bed provided much relief, it was impossible to stop her hands exploring herself and joining in the process of grieving for her lost masculinity. They ran over her breasts, followed the line of her waist and hips, over her flat, soft front, and finally followed the shape of her abdomen as it disappeared between. She pulled her hand away, screwed her eyes shut and sighed, making her chest rub against the underside of the duvet. Temporary, 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 she told herself, and the self-reminder that there was at least a chink of light at the end of the tunnel made her feel slightly less oppressed. She put her arms at her sides, kept her eyes closed and remained on her back, trying not to think, until Jennifer returned wearing only a towel. When she began to remove it, the shower suddenly became the lesser of two evils and Mickey fled from the bedroom. There was no sanctuary, though, because she only escaped from the frying pan, the sight of Jennifer undressing, into the fire, the white monster lurking in the bathroom, and after a night's sleep, she had no option but to submit to its cruelty once again. Then, though, came the moment she had been dreading most, and it made the white monster seem tame by comparison. She pulled off her nightdress and, for the first time, removed the briefs that had only come into existence around her yesterday afternoon. She allowed them to fall to her ankles, then stepped out of them, a naked woman. While it was possible for the back of her mind to try to reassure her that the reflection she could see in the mirror was of someone else, she only had to look down for it to become difficult to breathe, and make her survival instinct tell her to keep herself busy, in the hope of taking both her mind and her eyes off her body. That proved impossible, though, because her next task was to step into the shower, where not only her mind and eyes, but her hands too, would be all over her body. By the time she was turning off the water and reaching for the towel, she had become painfully intimate with every presence, every absence, every curve, feature and contour of the female anatomy. Chapter 4. In loving memory, see you at lunch, Jennifer said as they parted to head for their first class, leaving Mickey alone in an alien world. The boys she passed in the corridor were far worse than the men in the mall had been, and staring at her legs or chest, they had at least been subtle, even if completely transparent, but these teenagers gazed openly at her without any concern for her feelings. Unfortunately, in most classes, she was near the back, so any time the teacher spoke to a student any further away than the front row or two, several pairs of eyes were given a perfect excuse to admire the part of her body that was under her desk. It was a relief to find Jennifer at lunchtime and to have the freedom to choose a table far away from prying eyes. They had only just settled down, though, before Tony arrived. "Hey," he said with slight uncertainty, then hovered, not quite sure whether he was welcome. "Hi, Tony," Mickey replied equally uncertainly, not at all sure how she would be expected to act, especially in front of a close friend who no doubt thought she and he were an item. The coward's way out beckoned. "Listen," she said, "I was wanting to talk to Jen. Do you mind?" "I'm sorry." "No, it's cool. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. Both of you." The look on his face was one of genuine concern, and Mickey felt a pleasant rush of something she could not name, and would rather not think any more deeply about. This was the first time since she had walked through the school door that morning that anyone of her own age and of the opposite sex had treated her with kindness and respect, and she smiled warmly in return. "Yeah, we're both good. See you after school?" "Sure. No problem, Mick. Catch you later, Jen." He turned and left them without another word. The corner of Jennifer's mouth twitched very slightly when she returned her eyes to Mickey, and she raised her eyebrows suggestively. "Stop it," Mickey giggled, more amazed than upset by the girlish sound she made. She then forced herself to become more serious. "So," she began, "how've you been today?" "Good," Jennifer replied, smiling. "Tracy and Steph were really nice. They said hi to me straight away, and we got talking." Soon a few more of the girls joined in. "It was great. And all those spiteful posts on group chat have slowed way down. See? That's what I told you. They're stopping because they can see that bombarding you with all that," she whispered, "CRAP isn't having the effect they expected. So they're getting fed up and turning their attention to something else, something that'll give them results. Stick it out, Jen. You're winning." "I feel so much better, Mickey. I can't thank you enough. If you hadn't come round last night, I might have done something really, really stupid." The smile immediately vanished from Mickey's face. "Like what?" she croaked, almost inaudibly. "Forget it. Here." Jennifer held up her phone and turned on the selfie camera. The girls put their heads together and smiled happily. Mickey had a warm, beautiful feeling right in her middle. Perhaps that more recent photo was not going to be absent from her friend's bedside for much longer. "You got tennis practice this afternoon?" "Yeah, and I'm playing a set against someone." "Who?" "Dunno yet. Coach LL pair us off there and then." "Cool. I've brought my stuff, because I want to go for a run later. I'll try to get back in time to see the end of your game." Jennifer was exhilarated, cool air rushing past her in the heat of the afternoon. She felt better than she had for days on end and, in her enthusiasm, looked to have knocked about 10 seconds off her best time. She tore around the last bend, bringing the tennis courts into view, to see that the practice matches had begun. She slowed to a jog, then a walk, to ease off correctly, and after a few stretching exercises slid onto one of the benches at the side of Mickey's court. When she looked at the scoreboard, she was in for a shock. Mickey was already down 5-1, and it was love 15 on her service. Mickey served, and the ball came rocketing back towards her. She played a mid-court ball, which was returned wide on her forehand side. Mickey then hit the ball with all her strength cross-court, near the corner, and it almost immediately soared over the net, just inside the tramlines, with Mickey completely out of position and still reversing her momentum. The next point was an almost exact repeat. She was down 3 match points. This time, it looked as if they would settle into a rally, but on the 9th stroke, Mickey again attempted a cross-court winner. Finally, she managed to pass her opponent, but unfortunately she had hit the ball with more force than control and it landed between the tramlines. Out. Game, set, and match to Croft. Mickey and the other girl, Samantha, shook hands and returned to the side to collect their things. Sam, the coach, called and the victorious player walked over and began what must have been a pleasant conversation, judging by the amount of smiling and nodding performed by the two participants. Mickey finished zipping her bag up and then hugged herself with both arms while Jennifer spoke to her. "You all right?" she said. "That wasn't like you." "Obviously, I'm not myself at the moment. And I'm sore." "Sore? What is it? Feet? Not your knees, I hope?" "No, not my knees." Mickey continued to hug herself. Jennifer's intended reply was thwarted by a distraction that took her eyes away from Mickey to look at something behind her. "Ms. White," a voice said, and Mickey turned to face Mr. Walker, her tennis coach. What on earth was that all about? "I'm sorry, coach, I didn't play well today." "Didn't play well? You got virtually nothing right. You can't fire down first serves at 140. You lost all that lovely flight and spin you're usually so good at. Your second serve was more difficult to return than your first. And what was it with all those cross-court passing shots? You can't hit through your opponent like that. Or have you suddenly decided you want to play men's tennis? Women are just as agile around the court, but don't have the weight of shot to do what you were obviously trying to do. You need to go down the line. The ball doesn't take as long to get there. Save the cross-court winners for when you have a better angle, or you've got your opponent out of position." "I know. I'm sorry." "Never mind, we'll put it down to an off day, and we'll work on some of those points on Monday. Okay?" "Yes, Mr. Walker. Thanks." Back in the locker room, the two girls pulled their sports tops over their heads at the same time. Jennifer took one quick sideways glance at Mickey, then turned her head to look straight at her chest, eyes stretched as wide as they could, mouth fully open. "Oh, my God," she said in shock. "Mickey, what were you thinking? You must be in agony. Where on earth is your sports bra?" With sudden revelation, Mickey looked at Jennifer's chest. Her bra had thick straps, a wide band underneath her bust, and the cups were plain, flattening, rather than lifting, her breasts. When she had packed last night, Mickey had noticed a few bras in the drawer that looked like that, but not knowing what they were, she ignored them and instead brought 2 ordinary ones. "You should have told me. I didn't need to go for a run. You could have borrowed mine." That was an unfortunate comment. While Mickey knew it was not uncommon for a boyfriend and girlfriend to exchange pieces of underwear as an erotic secret, and had actually wondered once or twice whether Jennifer might not suggest it one day, an offer to borrow her bra was something she would never, ever, have expected. Worse was to come. Jennifer threw off the rest of her clothes, wrapped a towel around herself and headed into the shower room. Mickey did the same, and when she arrived found the answer to a question that had been not only in Matt's mind, but in the heads of a great many of the male students. The girls did indeed have a communal shower. That forced Mickey to stand next to a fully nude Jennifer, to be aware of all of her sumptuous beauty, legs, rounded bottom, front, hips, waist, breasts, but without even the tiniest hint of an erection. Life could be very, very cruel. Jennifer's crisis seemed to be over, and during the coming days she and Mickey became closer than ever, closer than Mickey remembered from the days when she had been her boyfriend, and closer than Jennifer remembered, growing up as girls. Mickey's crisis also abated, but only slightly. While she was becoming accustomed to being a girl, she was still far from happy about it. That came to a head one morning, 2 or 3 weeks into her time as a female, when she woke to find a few small bloodstains on her underwear. This was something she had known would eventually come, but even the inevitability of its approach did nothing to lessen the blow when it did. She opened the bathroom cabinet, retrieved a cardboard box that in the past she had noticed, but done her best to ignore. She removed a thin tube with a string hanging from one end, and settled down on the closed toilet lid to read the enclosed leaflet with instructions, tears of outrage forming in her eyes at what she was going to have to do. That same day, she sought out Tony at the earliest possible opportunity. She caught up with him in at his locker, talking to one of his friends. As soon as he saw her approach, he said something urgently to the other boy, who made his way off immediately. "Hey," Tony said, "how are you and me? Soon as school's over, we're going to the mall. Like we said we would. Same time every day, until that damned old man makes an appearance." On the third day, another Thursday, Mickey and Tony rounded the same corner to find no sign of the clothes shop. With a gasp of delight, Mickey raised her hand and pointed, stammering, I don't believe. Come on!" Tony called urgently, already several paces ahead of her, "Hurry up, in case it vanishes again." Spurred on by Tony's warning, Mickey tore after him, reaching the entrance only a second or two later. Tony opened the door and stood back gallantly and, to her surprise, bowing. "Après-vous, mademoiselle," he said, making her look at him in indignation, but she smiled when he explained, "Hopefully the last time anyone says that to you." Mickey patted him on the shoulder in appreciation and walked past him into the shop. Nothing had changed since their last visit, the same nonsensical junk on display, the same old man, same repulsive appearance, same old bathrobe. Probably the same one, and probably not washed since she had last seen him. "No, it hasn't been," the old man said, "but unlike you people, I don't need to. Now, may I take a guess at why you're here?" "You know why, I'm sure," Mickey replied, trying her best to remain polite, but finding it difficult. The old man put his hand under the counter and laid the same apparently empty cardboard box on the counter. $1, he said, only to have a dollar bill pushed into his hand immediately. Mickey had had one ready before she had even entered the mall. The old man accepted the bill. "Close your eyes," he said, "you know what to do." "Yes," Mickey replied, doing exactly as asked, and, when she opened them and looked down, there was the glowing bubble, exactly as before. "Only," the old man interrupted before she had a chance to take it, "you might not like the result." "What do you mean? What's it going to do to me?" "Only what you wish for. Which is to be changed back into Matthew White, a boy, as I was before." "Then that's what it'll do. So why wouldn't I like that? Are you telling me I'm going to be turned into a guy who wants to be a girl?" "Nothing like that. If you wish to be exactly as you were before, that is what you will get. So there's no problem then." Mickey lifted the bubble, let it roll onto the palm of her hand as before, while she shut her eyes. When she closed her hand over the wish, the same white light enveloped her, and vanished almost immediately, leaving Matthew White standing in front of the old man, looking delighted. "Yes," he said, and, turning to face Tony, held up his hand for a high five, which was returned with slightly less enthusiasm than it had been offered. "I believe our business has come to an end," the old man said, and Matt turned to look jubilantly at him. "Got it in one," he said, "let's go." He and Tony stopped just inside the door when Matt turned to speak. "Won't be back, old man," he said. "Goodbye, Matthew." "This one's on me," Matt said as he and Tony approached the same cafe they had visited immediately after their first visit to Spelzer, US, "and I can tell you what I'm not having. Herbal tea." Tony chuckled. "I'll find us a table," he replied. "Hey." Matt's head turned to follow where Tony was looking to see Karen and Tom once again. Both had seemed to hesitate, as if they had not wanted to be spotted by the two boys, but now, realizing that they had been, they continued to walk towards them as before, though with noticeable reluctance. "Hey, Matt," Tom said as they arrived, "hope it goes okay tomorrow." "How are you doing, Matt?" Karen said, giving him a quick hug. "I'm so sorry." The couple hurried off, leaving Matt and Tony to look blankly at each other. "What was all that about?" Tony asked as Matt laid the drinks down on the table. "Search me." The boys talked over the unfathomable encounter for a while, but could think of nothing to explain the way Karen and Tom had spoken to them, so the conversation drifted onto other subjects and it was forgotten. About an hour and a half later, Matt was opening the front door of his house. "Is that you, Matt?" his mother called from the living room. "How are you, sweetheart?" She came through the door into the hall and rubbed his arm affectionately. She was looking closely at his face, as if trying to judge his mood. "Dinner will be ready soon," she continued. The aroma of cooking was filling the house. "Thanks, Mom," Matt said, heading upstairs. "I'll give you a shout when it's ready. Then, I don't think we should be too late in bed. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, and it's going to be a pretty trying one, too." Matt wasted no time in heading for his room, where he threw himself onto his bed and got out his phone. He had unlocked it and was about to call Jennifer when it rang. "Tony," Matt said, "have you any idea what the hell's going on?" "Yeah, I've found out what's happened," came the reply. Tony's voice was quiet and unsteady. "Matt, it's not good. It's Jennifer's funeral tomorrow." Matt was unable to speak for 15 or 20 seconds after Tony's bombshell. His silence was peppered with short bursts from the other end. "Matt? Buddy? You there? Say something. Tell me you're all right." Eventually, Matt found his voice, although it was a broken, sobbing voice. "Tony, what? How?" "She stole a bottle of sleeping pills from her aunt," Tony explained, "and the night you and I found that shop, she swallowed the whole lot before she went to bed. Her mom found her in a coma the next morning, and she was rushed to hospital, but she died a few days later. It was a terrible time for everybody. There was a post-mortem, then an inquest, and tomorrow's her funeral. The police have taken her phone and they're investigating all her social media accounts, looking at the messages people have posted about her." The next day was harrowing. The church was so full that Matt and Tony gave up their seats to two elderly ladies who were distant relations of Jennifer's, and stood at the back, amid a very large group. Jennifer's father gave a tearful eulogy in which he described his daughter as a shining star, whose light had been cruelly extinguished long before her time, and who would be missed by everyone who had known her, for the rest of their lives. By the time they reached the graveside, both Matt and Tony were distraught, and watched helplessly as the coffin was lowered out of sight into the earth. The mourners departed, with a number of them carrying on to the hospitality. Normally the mood lightened slightly at this point, with the pain of loss beginning to ease, but today the atmosphere was still morose, and Matt slipped away after experiencing the worst, blackest Friday of his short life, and hoping nothing would ever come close to it for the longer part to come. Chapter 5. Brigadoon Monday arrived. Matt was unable to concentrate in any of his classes. Monday afternoon arrived, and he could hardly make clean contact between racket and ball. He played a practice set in which he performed even more badly than in his first match as a girl. Tuesday arrived, and Matt stopped even trying to concentrate in class. Tuesday afternoon arrived, and his ball striking was even worse. Another practice set saw him win one single point, and that only because of an unforced error, a mishit, by his opponent. The end of the school day arrived, and Matt wandered aimlessly on a random path. Tony, who had been watching out for him on their usual route home, and who had been feeling steadily more and more concerned about his friend, decided to do a circuit of the school, eventually spotting him heading, accidentally as it turned out, in the general direction of the shopping mall. "Hey," Tony said softly, slowing to a walk as he caught up. "Hey. How are you? If that's not a silly question." "Same as ever. These days." "Heading for the mall?" "No. I beg to differ." "Oh. Right." Matt finally took some little notice of his surroundings to discover that he need only cross the road to be standing right in front of it. He shrugged. This time, with their mood being much more sober than usual, the two boys used the pedestrian crossing, respectfully gave way to other pedestrians on the far side as they approached the doors, and entered. It was impossible to avoid following the route to the place they had found Spells R Us, but, as expected, the teenage fashion boutique was still in place. Matt sat down on a bench facing the shop, Tony standing with his back to it, looking in concern at Matt, who lowered his head and buried it on his hands. "What am I going to do?" Matt sobbed into his fingers. Matt, there isn't. But, Jennifer, why did this have to happen? I'd give anything to be able to go back and just. He raised his head to look at Tony, but his eyes immediately defocused and darted to the side, looking at something behind him. His mouth fell open in surprise. What? Tony said and turned, only to react with the same disbelief as he read the name of the shop. Spells or Us. Both boys froze for an instant before Tony, reacting first, began to sprint towards the door. Don't just sit there, he called, without turning his head. What are you waiting for? Matt followed, running as fast as he could, not even daring to blink, in case the place vanished during the split second his eyes were shut. Tony pushed open the door, and Matt rushed past him, over to the counter and stood, looking at the same old man, his determination evaporating into nothing, not having the first clue what he should do or say next. Oh my, ye must really love her, ye woke me up, the old man said in a very poor Scottish accent. Matt, completely bewildered, stared at him in confused silence. It's from a Broadway show. Brigadoon. Two Americans in Scotland stumble across a lost village that only appears for one day every 100 years. One of them falls in love with a girl from the village. When he goes home, he regrets leaving her so badly that he goes back, and the village wakes up again, just for him. What can I do for you, Matt? Jennifer. Yes, such a pity. She was a lovely young woman. Isn't there anything could be done? That depends. Tell me. Usually, this is the part where I tell my customers, how I've screwed them over, but I didn't need to this time, because you did such a wonderful job, all by yourself. But I was her friend. She was fine. She got over all that. No, she didn't. Yes, she did, because of me. The old man shook his head, smiling cruelly. No, he said, she could have got through it thanks to her friend Michelina, but Michelina doesn't exist, does she? So poor Jennifer had no one. But. And shallow, self-centered Matthew White didn't do her much good. Oh, God, no. And this is the good bit. For me. What? I can offer you a way out of this, but it comes at a price. To you. Matt signed in despair. I knew it, he said. How much? Oh, not money, the old man replied with a predatory grin. It costs so much more than just money. Matt trembled in sudden realization. My soul, he stammered. Oh, for goodness sake, don't be ridiculous. I'm not as bad as all that. If you think I'm evil, you have a lot to learn. No, I just meant I get the satisfaction of watching you suffer as you make your choice. What do you mean? I can offer you either thread of your life, the one you're living now, as Matthew, or the one you created with your wish, as Michelina. You have a free choice, but you should make it carefully, because this is the last time you and I will ever meet, therefore the person you are when we very shortly part company, will be the person you are for the rest of your life. You can have everything you want for yourself. To be a man, to become a successful sportsman. You'll never be world #1, but you'll be in and out of the top 10 a few times, and you'll win one slam, the Australian Open. Success, riches, but a lifetime of regret that the woman you loved died when you were 17. Or you could be Michelina again, the girl whose friendship and devotion brought her friend back from the brink of despair. You'll need to let go of your ambitions, though, because you'll never make it in the women's game. You'll still have Jennifer, but no success and riches. You'll settle down and raise a family. But not together. You'll both have to have your children by someone else. And the one thing you really want is the one thing you can never have. Jennifer. You could be a man, but never see her again. Or you could save her life, but have to give her up. How much do you love her, Matt? Matt's shoulders had slumped while he listened, and recognized every word as the truth. He turned and looked sadly at Tony, who was staring wide-eyed at him. Having lived through the past 2 or 3 weeks, and having already witnessed the impossible, he had no doubt at all about the sincerity of what he had just heard, and now only had to wait for Matt to make his choice. He deliberately gave no signal that might influence his friend's decision. While he suddenly found himself nurturing a hope of his own, he recognized that he had no right to try to sway him one way or the other. Matt turned back to the old man, looking defeated. B stuttered. I choose. With a gasp of shock, Michalina realized she had said her own name with her own voice. She was standing in front of a mirror, holding something blue against her front. She was in a shop, she realized, a clothes shop, the place where, the fashion boutique where Spells R Us had been. That's the one, a girl's voice said, and a face appeared over her shoulder, looking in approval at her reflection. Jennifer. Jen. Mickey squealed and spun around to throw her arms around a surprised Jennifer Moffat. Hey, she laughed. I know I spotted it for you, but I didn't expect that. It's just so great to see you. What? I've been standing behind you the whole time. We came in here together, remember? Prom dresses? Have you hit your head or something? Sorry. I'm fine. You? Never better. Releasing Jennifer, both looked down at the blue dress in Mickey's hand that, by now, had become a crumpled rag. We'd better find another for you to try on. Jennifer laughed. She produced a hanger with an identical dress dangling from it and followed Mickey towards the changing rooms, after retrieving the one she herself was going to try on. Wow! Jennifer exclaimed when Mickey pulled back the curtain. The dress was mid-thigh length, only a couple of inches longer than the skirt she had on, the same skirt, she believed, that the old man had dressed her in the first time. It had been with some trepidation that she had removed her outer clothes, not knowing what her reaction would be when she revealed a girl in her underwear, but to her surprise she was completely accepting, having done it before, and it also seemed strangely banal, as if this were the way her body was supposed to be. Tony's not going to survive prom night, Jennifer giggled. Talk about dress to kill. Mickey spun around and took a proper look at herself in the full-length mirror. She gasped in surprise. Her figure was incredible, and the dress showed it off to perfection. Jennifer came up beside her and they each put an arm around the other and stood for a minute to admire the reflection of two beautiful young women. Even Mickey accepted that Jennifer's comment made perfect sense. Both Tony and Rob were going to love this, and their best behavior was going to be a true test of self-control. Outside the shop, Jennifer hugged her. See ya, she said. You better hurry, girl, Tony LL be waiting. You were supposed to be meeting him 10 minutes ago, weren't you? Tony? Oh, Tony. Mickey reddened. She must have arranged to meet Tony somewhere, but in a thread of her life that she had not lived. However, with only a moment's thought, she was able to guess exactly where they would be meeting. Don't panic. You were buying your prom dress. That's a higher court. Mickey rushed to the same cafe they had always frequented, to find Tony sitting alone, with 2 drinks on the table in front of him, looking around patiently, seeming quite contented. He smiled happily when he saw her walking towards him, and jumped to his feet to hold her seat for her. Sorry I'm late, she said, sliding elegantly into the chair. Don't worry about it, he replied, glad to see you haven't changed, and, when he saw her looking at him in disbelief, added, in that respect. He slid one of the cups across the table towards her. Herbal tea, he said with a hint of apology in his manner. Herbal tea. Thanks, Mickey replied, taking a tiny sip. I suppose I could get used to this. Might even get to like it. I guess I'd better. I wanted to ask you, how are you? I mean, really? How much do you remember? Everything. Matt, Mickey, the old man, Jennifer. Everything. He leant forwards and lowered his voice. I was at her funeral. With you. Mickey nodded. That's a relief, in a way, she said, because it means that at least one person knows I'm not going completely mad. Never, Tony replied, suddenly serious. I think you're wonderful. When Mickey returned a look of amazement, he insisted, but you still haven't told me how you're coping. It's been less than an hour, Tony, she said, ask me tomorrow. Or next week. I'll probably have a better idea by then. But, she added with a scoff, if anything, this feels disturbingly normal. She looked steadily at him for a few moments, then her face lit up with a brave, if resigned, smile. I think I'll be all right. Other women can survive being women, so why can't I? Yeah, I guess. But that's easy for me to say, isn't it? This was my own choice, remember. But given what was at stake. Her voice trailed off for a moment and a faraway look changed into one of dread, then back to her original brave, resigned expression, I'll take it any day. Tony reached out to where her hand was resting on the table and lightly brushed a beautiful, almond-shaped nail with the tip of his middle finger. Jennifer really does have the best friend in the world. Mickey's face fell slightly at the mention of Jennifer, but she recovered immediately and smiled warmly. And I have 2 best friends in the world. What are you going to do now? I mean in the future. I heard the old man tell you your tennis career's over. Yeah, I think I'll give up on sports, she shrugged, aim for university. I'm thinking psychology. You'd be great at that. You've already proved yourself as a counselor. As the conversation progressed, Mickey noticed something that was both interesting and satisfying. Tony was speaking to her the way he always had. His manner had not changed since she had become permanently female. Because he's talking to my mind, not my boobs, she reasoned, but then another thought struck her. He was not, in fact, speaking in exactly the same way he used to. There was something else, something more mature, something more respectful, as if he were losing the childishness that he had used to display. He was showing her genuine respect. That was an impressive quality for any man, and it was one that especially endeared him to the young woman sitting opposite him. They walked home slowly, but when they reached the corner where they usually parted, Tony showed no sign of leaving her, and Mickey realized to her delight that he was walking her home. I ran into a couple of the guys in the mall, he said, stopping to look at her. Yeah? Everyone seems to think I'm your date for the prom. Mickey gave a faint laugh and smiled. That was the vibe I got from Jen, she replied. I think it was the bit where she told me my new dress was gonna knock you out. Yeah. But you and I seem to have missed one important thing. What? Tony reached out for her hand, and she let him take it. To her surprise, he lifted it to his mouth and gently kissed the backs of her fingers. Mick, he began, then hesitated, looking frightened to death. Michelina, would you do me the honor, the incredible, wonderful honor, of being my date for the prom? Mickey froze in amazement for an instant, then a smile grew on her face, her eyes sparkled and she laughed, not one of amusement, but a relaxed laugh of delight. Tony had never heard a more beautiful sound, nor seen a more beautiful sight than the face beaming back at him. Yes, she said in complete happiness, yes. I'd love to. She freed her fingertips, which were willingly released, and put both hands on his shoulders to steady herself as she stood on tiptoe and kissed him on the cheek. She did not allow their bodies to touch, but for the rest of the walk home, she let him hold her hand. Like to dance? Tony said. He looked supremely handsome in his tuxedo, and together with Mickey made what almost everyone saw as the most attractive couple at this year's senior prom. Yeah, Mickey replied. Things were well underway and she was having the time of her life. She and Tony had spent most of the night with Jennifer and Rob as a foursome, although the latter two had slipped off about a quarter of an hour ago and there was still no sign of them. Tony led her by the hand to the floor and turned to face her. It was a slow number that was playing, the main reason he had asked at this particular moment, so he took her right hand in his left and put his right arm around her in the classic ballroom hold. As usual, his breath trembled and his heart seemed to double in rate when he felt the shape of her waist and hip through her dress. She was so slender he always got the momentary impression he would almost be able to close the fingers of one hand around her. Mickey ran her hand and arm around Tony's shoulder, her breath and her heartbeat reacting in the same way at the thrill of his broad shoulders and powerful frame. She had a vision of her gentle, pliable body being tenderly squeezed by the strength of his arms. She allowed them to dance close to each other, with the occasional bump of knee against knee, and she moved so that she made her chest almost brush against his, but not quite. The music came to an end and she took his arm as he led her from the floor, but they had only gone a few paces before Mickey gasped in delight. Jen, she called and, giving Tony an affectionate pat on the arm, rushed over to her friend and flew into her arms. Breaking off, she then took Jennifer's arm and began to lead her while she prattled excitedly. "You all right?" "Yeah, why wouldn't I be?" Jennifer laughed. "Will you please stop being such a mother hen? And by the way, do you mind?" "Oh, I'm sorry," Mickey gasped, remembering Rob, who was still walking alongside Jennifer, and was still holding her hand. "I am. Jen, love you. And I love you. We'll catch you guys later." Mickey hugged her again and ran off, feeling as if chains were falling from her as she got further away from Jennifer and closer to Tony. She found him still hovering near the edge of the dance floor, looking a little lost, or perhaps a little lonely, as she preferred to think. This time she led him onto the floor, and they spent the next 4 dances together before deciding to go for a walk outside. Standing underneath a tree, with her back to it, Mickey dragged Tony over the coals. When she spoke, she lifted her chin just a little, making the most of her slender neck and ensuring he could see a flash of white teeth. She dropped her eyes demurely sometimes, letting him look down at her perfectly shaped head. Occasionally she shifted her weight, very slightly, very carefully, bringing her bust within a fraction of his chest. When she was listening, she pressed her lips together, not quite pouting, but showing the delightful line of her mouth. She tilted her head from time to time, only a little, but enough to make her hair dance on her shoulders. Her eyes sparkled as she sunk them deep into him, and, of course, her heart and his heart were only inches from each other. There was a steely, hungry look in his eyes, but it was tempered by a softness that gave it a completely different message than it would have had on its own, and in her it inspired an exciting sense of being both in danger and completely safe at the same time. Never before had she experienced such an exhilarating feeling, knowing that not only would he never lay an unwanted finger on her, but he was actually enjoying the way she was tormenting him every bit as much as she was. What a lovely man he was growing up to be. Deciding that the signal was long overdue, she placed her feet perfectly together and stood at her full height, her shoulders slightly back, her arms resting at her sides. "That's where your hand goes, if you're brave enough, into the gap between my waist and my elbow." She lifted her face to look straight at him, parted her lips slightly and let her eyes flicker shut. 4 or 5 seconds was all she had to wait.